me through it.
Great. Okay. The first thing I wanted to draw your attention to was the elections in South Africa. I told you the ANC had done very badly in the last elections. And then they've just put together the new cabinet, and I sent you those photos of the new cabinet members. And I don't know if you
Yeah.
noticed, there's a distinct change in atmosphere. It is a lot more diverse,
Yeah.
which is to say, it's for the first time we see people who burn in the sun in ministerial positions. That's number one. That's quite interesting. Number two, that is quite interesting, is that um, the foreign minister who was very pro-Russia has gone.
Yeah.
And then I attended, stop it. And then I attended a webinar last night about a digital transformation in Africa. And we had discussed previously how Washington wasn't really very interested in Africa. And suddenly it seems to me Washington is back. They have invested in a big way in tech. Um, they, if you look at our cabinet, that's an indication that Russia is not in the place that it was, and Iran might also be a little bit feeling that it is being left out of things. So this is quite a big change. And so that sets a new tone for Africa. Certainly, I haven't heard so much pro, the other side rhetoric since. I wanted to ask you, first of all, the assassination attempt on Trump. There
We'll
are
go
so
there
many
first. Okay.
conspiracy theories out there. Your
Yeah.
professional opinion.
Well, I mean, I'm not a professional assassin, so
Yeah, no.
my
But
opinion,
of
my opinion
security.
is I agree with the analysis that this has become a really divisive issue in the United States,
Mm,
with rhetoric, angry rhetoric, and an overwhelming sense of patriotism on both sides of it. But we also know that it clearly seems to be that the strong divisive American politics seems to attract folks that might be, upon analysis, somewhat unstable from a mental health perspective on both sides. Okay. Now,
mhm.
this card carrying Republican member who was also a small time donator to a political action group that was associated with the Democrats, and some confusing sort of uh, childhood and upbringing and stuff like that. I don't know because I can't really get into the mind of the shooter, and he's now deceased. But what I can tell you is that from a tactical kind of analysis of the
Mm,
situation, no one gets to climb up on a rooftop invisibility and be visible to the Secret Service and local law enforcement, who should be like, hey, why is that guy climbing up on that building? So there was a massive security failure, and there's no question in my mind that obviously the ball was dropped. Now, in the defense of sort of the Secret Service, they're responsible obviously for presidential security, but they don't travel, in the hundreds of folks that you would need to secure an outdoor venue for, say, 10,000 or more attendees. Okay. They
mm,
rely on local law enforcement. And local law enforcement in the United States is going to vary in capability, in training, and in working relationships with the various federal government organizations that deploy, like FBI and, of course, the Secret Service, who is a primary responsibility. But as when I was at DEF CON and there was a bomb threat made against the facility, every organization shows up, right? Like it's an all hands on deck moment, right? When there was a bomb threat at the Caesar's Palace Convention Center. So what we do know is that the training and capabilities of the Secret Service are, top notch. They are the Praetorian Guard of the President of the United States. And I think here was an example of either a difficulty in understanding the capabilities of the local assistance, law enforcement. And there's no reason why that you couldn't have put a uniformed officer on a spot that you knew was a potential, sniper hide, not really hide because he was out in the open, but a potential sniper position, from the get-go. So the big question around everybody sort of like dealing with it, and some people are talking about the rifle and all that. Let's back up the truck for a moment and just say, if there's a perfect building near where the president is, that has to be covered. Like, there's no questions. So the fact that nobody was on top of it tells me that it was a massive security planning. This is where the advanced team, so the Secret Service just doesn't rock up and go, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. They have a plan. They have something called the advanced team, which are usually senior folks that have seen there, done it, have been there and are responsible for planning it out and setting up the overwatch. It was fantastic that the counter snipers were able to take out the threat. It was not fantastic that the threat existed there and that somehow the counter sniper team didn't even see this guy climbing up onto the roof, 150 or so meters away from where the president was. So there are questions. And I think this will be a great learning and textbook experience for all sorts of, it will be studied to death, right? In terms of like how to secure a venue. And I mean, the first thing any military person that has had any training whatsoever is like, hey, let's make sure all the high ground is covered, boys. Right? Like, this, because that's where, the person's going to have the best vantage point from. So, and then the fact that there was videotape apparently of people pointing out to local law enforcement, hey, there's this guy and he's climbing up this building.
Yeah, that's
and then it's like, and then the narrative goes that, okay, they sent 2 officers over there, but by the time they got there, they couldn't find anyone. Now, Aura, you're not dumb. When you finish climbing a building, what do you generally do? Do you hang out exactly where you've climbed up the building? No, right? Mm-hmm. If you're intent on causing mayhem and being a shooter, you're going to move forward on the building. So did they not look up? Did they not like? So it's a terrible tragedy, especially with the fact of that, and politics aside. The violence in politics is a terrible thing, and it is the threat to democracy, whichever side you're passionate about. But there are some folks that have taken this on as sort of a cause celeb that are suggesting this happened as a result of the Republican rhetoric and the MAGA movement. I think that's a stretch. We don't know what was in the mind of this individual. We don't know all the details and what the motivation for the attack was. So this is a little bit of 1 + 3 = donkey, right? Like the math just doesn't work up. And I think to try and place this all on what is coming out of the voices of both parties, right? Is a little bit much. I mean, to go from like hating one side or like, being displeased by the conduct of one side, totally cool. Getting the motivation to get out your rifle and go up on a building and take a pot shot at the presidential candidate, that's like a whole new level of decision making, which I don't think any normal person would undertake to do, So that's my kind of armchair analysis of the whole thing.
Yeah, I just thought it was very weird that there were people pointing him out. And then the other thing that struck me as very weird was that Trump's security was ducked behind him and not, which was, I think that is bad training and possibly a reason why you shouldn't do equality of outcomes with positions that require expertise and training.
I agree in part, but here's the thing. If I'm a sniper up on top of a building and I take more than one shot, everybody's going to look in my direction. That's the perfect time for a second shooter to take a shot at the president. So this is why they just like mob him like a football team, because they're like, they don't know if there's going to be a follow-on attack. They don't know if there's going to be more shots. And the reason why they try to get him out of there as soon as possible is there could be an explosive threat as well. They don't know. I mean, I understand that they walk dogs through the site. That's usually typical, looking for explosives, right? But there are ways to describe it, and there are certain types of explosives that remain very hard to detect. The other issue was this gentleman with his rifle apparently approached magnometers, which are designed to identify, you having a large amount of metal on you. Certainly, an assault rifle would have enough metal to set off the magnometers. There's now a question about, well, how did he get through the magnometers into the venue? And if it was overwatched by security, by law enforcement, but they had hired contractors to kind of do the quick pad down on you, it's quite possible, he slipped through that thing. So they're definitely going to have to review everything from across the timeline. And this is not sort of like one of those events that there's one person that is to blame, right? This is like a failure of the advance team. This is a failure of local security. It's a failure of, the officers that were sent to see if they could find this guy and failed to look up or go up and check the roof. Like, maybe, and again, maybe the excuse is they were concerned about the fact that if they went up that ladder, the Secret Service may shoot them. But that's why God invented the radio, and you should have had communications. Please tell the Secret Service we're investigating a possible threat on this building, blah, blah, blah. Like, so there's gonna be radio traffic reviewed, and all of this evidence will be gathered. But again, this is a great example of the type of thing that can happen in any country. It's happened in many countries where the presidential candidate has either been assassinated or it was attempted. South America seems to have the running stock on that. But even one of the most passive societies there are out there, the prime minister of Japan was assassinated by a homemade gun. So you have to kind of think about this from the perspective of like that threat landscape. Japan is by no means a country awash in military style firearms at all, but yet there was an important member of the Japanese government killed. So I think this is what we need to understand, and I think the big part of this for me, and the big takeaway is there is a reason why elected officials need to be protected. They cannot just be sort of left to their own devices, and I think that is universally accepted, and that's why there is the designation of international protected person. It's why the Pope generally, I'm not going to talk about the previous history of Christianity, but the new popes have been just more or less peace oriented. I'm going to say, and they're protected by the elite Swiss Guard that follows them everywhere, and he's also an internationally protected person as well. So I think we need to understand that there's no such thing as sort of like doing security for international protected people on the cheap.
No, I don't think so. And there's obviously always a risk. I'm just thinking, Robert Fico in the EU was shot not so long ago. It seems like politicians, there's sort of a fever pitch in emotion globally, it seems, politically.
Absolutely. Yeah, agree. And so let's go back to the African government, the new African government, South African government. I agree with two of your theses, that Washington suddenly woke up and went, hey, the Chinese and the Russians are eating our lunch. We know that we have a good relationship with South Africa, and that there's a massive amount of influence that South Africa wields in the African continent. Putting our money there to support the new government, I think was a bold and the correct move. And I think it's possible that we're going to see a shift. I haven't seen anything official yet, but there have been think tanks that have talked about the idea that certainly large parts of Africa are opportunity and not aid consuming. And by opportunity, I mean raw materials for and possibly relatively inexpensive labor when you look at like Europe or other countries, a growing middle class, a higher level of education that is being provided. All of these things are sort of no longer, we have to give the starving people in Africa food aid. What we need to do is look at how do we build sustainable economies. And this was before, this realization, I think, has come from the Chinese influence, the Iranian influence, and the Russian influence going into Africa, the further north parts of Africa, to everyone's uncomfortableness, because, we still have and maintain a military counterterrorism, active counterterrorism capability deployed in Africa. And this is one of the many military missions that is done throughout the globe. And it's not just an American thing. It is, of course, heavily American, but it's supported by at least the Five Eyes and NATO as well.
And going back to that, I'm very interested because you told me about Kazakhstan, that Macron had gone and made a deal with Kazakhstan about uranium. And I was looking at the situation in Niger, Mali, and what's the other one? Burkina Faso.
Yeah. Okay. Burkina Faso, like it's a dumpster fire.
So it's a dumb. And then in Niger, I think it is they asked all the American troops to leave.
Yeah.
And then so now we've got all the French troops, all the American, and even I didn't realize there were some German troops, but they've been pulled as well. And at the same time, we have a situation where jihadi violence is increasing.
Yeah.
And I looked at that threat report that you sent me, and since then, there has been an escalation. And I'm just wondering how much the absence of American forces and French forces, who are probably very experienced in counterterrorism, is going to contribute to this escalation in jihadi violence.
Yeah, well, obviously jihadis will send a vacuum of kind of it will come quickly back, especially if the pressure is off them and there's no active Western counterterrorism. But here's the thing: the Russians are no fans of jihadist activity. They recently suffered that big attack attributed to ISIS. And interestingly enough, Iran, no fan of ISIS either. Okay. Now, this is one of the things that Western think tanks get wrong frequently. And they say, Iran is an exporting nation of terror. Yes, but they are not aligned with nor supportive of ISIS. And this is something, and in fact, the IRCG, which is, their sort of elite, in quotations, forces that they deploy in a similar fashion to things like the French Foreign Legion, but this is how Iran goes and influences and meddles in other countries as they throw the IRCG there. The IRCG have clashed with ISIS in the past. So this is a really interesting dynamic, and it might be kind of trading Peter to feed Paul type of scenario. But Russians, I think, and the Wagner Group and anyone rotating off of the Ukraine to reconstitute, do it in Africa, but still keep the pressure on and the military, and the military support for various regimes in Africa, they will do it a lot less expensive than the Americans or the French or anyone else with a massive logistics chain, right? So if I was a leader in one of those African countries and I had to pick between having American and French forces or the cheaper Russians, which I can get lots of, right? I might lean in that direction, especially when you look at hard currency exchanges and things like that. On the other side of it, Iran is tempting too, because if you've got an ISIS problem, Iran, who suffered that horrible bombing during the funeral of that recently deceased general, where ISIS claimed responsibility, Iran's looking for payback too. And to be fair, Iran will be even less expensive as Russians. Now, a lot of baggage comes along with that, unfortunately, jihadism, but a different kind of jihadism, but there's nothing to say that, this is a result of you get Iran's involvement. You sort of get, as an added bonus, the world's smallest juicer and some Hamas and some Hezbollah, right? Mixed into that relationship. So, this is sort of like buyer beware for various African regimes, from my perspective, and be careful about like who you're in business with too, because that will have repercussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how much you're aware of the ECOWAS, was the sort of trade bloc of West Africa. And Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have now done a hard break with ECOWAS. We're a huge problem because they are very big borders, and it's along those borders that you get a lot of the jihadi violence. The other thing is, it's interesting that you see the Francophone countries are mostly broken with the English-speaking countries, because now we have Nigeria and Ghana sort of stepping to the fore, and they have to try to get back security in an area where they are now not welcome anymore. The juntas of these three breakaway countries are absolutely resolute. They don't want any interventions, they don't want any assistance, they don't want anything like that. So it's interesting times. What is very interesting to me about the Kazakhstan and Macron was that Niger used to be the top source of uranium for France.
Right.
And so last year, was it last year or earlier this year, when they had that standoff and they said to the French troops, get out, the whole issue was that Niger then cut off uranium, and everybody was going, ha, we've got them. There'll be no place for them to get uranium. And now, France is absolutely kind of in a very bad position. And they hadn't reckoned on Macron is not as stupid as he looks, is what I have to keep saying to people. This is a very smart guy. He does a lot of footwork in the background. And so he had already set up something with Kazakhstan. And you pointed out to me that Kazakhstan, am I pronouncing it correctly? Some people seem to say Kazakhstan, that this is a problem for Russia.
Yeah, definitely. So Kazakhstan has started flexing a little bit and is deeply interested in attracting Western investment, realizing that Russia's decision to invade the Ukraine, where it said the word Ukraine, the general orders could have said Kazakhstan as well. So they look at Russia at a time when I would say it was recovering from its Cold War era, and the corruption kind of spread, and the Kazakhs had resources that the Russians kind of were willing to buy with the newfound wealth that was brought with, basically the rise of the oligarchs, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that within Kazakhstan, there are big pockets of Russian sympathizers / Russian aligned, shall we say, and native speaking Russians. This is one of the things I think folks don't quite understand about the Central Asia, as well as even Eastern European. There are, Romanian villages that have gone back and forth between different countries, within the 20th century, right? As a result of new borders defined, post World War II, post World War I, before in World War I, as part of the Holy Roman Empire, which then transmorphed, if you will, into the German Prussian Empire. So there's been a lot of changes, and this is one of the things where just as you reach the border, it doesn't necessarily switch to that other nationality, right? And this is where the Ukraine was so, I would say, almost vulnerable to the idea of Russia coming in, handing out Russian passports to Russian-speaking people who were basically sympathetic to the Russians or bought into the propaganda. And it's like, okay, here's the border now. It would be sort of a little bit like Sweden rocking up and handing Swedish passports to the Inuit of Canada, and then basically saying, well, this is Sweden, right? It's like they're going to go with whoever gives them the best deal. Like, let's be cynical here. So I think this is one of the biggest problems, where you look at, like, Mongolia is another country, and that has also been the French have made, shall we say, have reached out to them as well, and have created a bit of resiliency into their own supply chains. Kazakhstan is interesting because it is where the Russian spaceport was located, and so and the reality of Russia right now is most of their GDP right now is being spent on the war, on the war in Ukraine, and it is absolutely impactful. I think the latest statistics I saw that come out is more than 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, according to the Ukrainians. I think for political purposes that figure might be a little bit inflated, but when you think that the standard, like, if you're measuring that amount of dead people, it's usually 3x to the amount of wounded people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's been 1.5 million Russians, killed or casualties. So again, I'm sort of extrapolating here and going, it's a big number, but it's, not, I think, generationally impactful in Russia yet. But if we go on for another 2 years of war and there's another 250,000 or so people killed, we're starting to look at, 1 million casualties out there at least. And that's truly frightening and truly historic, especially for something that isn't really a declared war, like in the World War sense at all. So it's astounding to me that, we're into this situation where, the instability that is happening across, the world, and even right in the EU, with the sudden turn to the right into some of the political leanings. I mean, who is it right now? Belarus is about to take over the presidency of the EU, and Belarus is like completely in bed with Putin. So this is going to be deeply problematic. We'll see, what we can do. But I think, all the European nations of the E7 are just going to keep voting nope, 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 and nope. And that government, that EU government might get paralyzed for a while, because they're going to have somebody that is like, hey, but really, Russia's a pretty good guy. But nope.
Yeah, and I think they've got Orban as well, and maybe to a smaller extent, but Robert Fico. So there is definitely a whole alliance that is sort of in the shadows, but not that powerful yet. And then Russia used to be in Armenia, and then they've sort of eased Russia out. And I'm looking at Armenia and Kazakhstan and thinking, most geopolitics commenters today they tend to be pro-Russian if they're on the interwebs.
Yeah.
I see a lot and their view is, Russia has got, the whole of Central Asia, and they've got part of Africa and some of Eastern Europe, and Russia's kind of rules the world. Well, until you kind of get to, you've got Macron in Kazakhstan, so not so much anymore. And then, and then Armenia kind of got lost. So just starting to fracture. The front was so powerful and sort of, impenetrable. and off limits to the West, and how the whole BRICS corridor that starts from there, goes Central Asia and then goes all the way to China. Yep. And that has definitely changed. And I don't think everyone has actually kept up with all of these changes.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is not necessarily like, we're not going to see, we're not going to see, I don't want to say rule it out, but we're not going to see French troop deployments into those countries. What they are is economic courtships and support at the UN on votes that are of strategic interest, right? Because if I put $1 billion or actually, even $150 million into some of these countries where $150 million does, gives a percentage point of GDP growth in really small countries, that has huge consequences, because then, France and other nations that are making those investments can call that in. The other thing, and again, using the cynicism lens that I like to say, one of the reasons why the Americans maybe have been very generous in terms of trying to engage with South Africa is because they got pretty uncomfortable, and so did their ally Israel, when South Africa tried to, essentially move a court case at the International Criminal Court against the leadership of Israel, right?
For sure.
And so one of the ways to sort of like quid pro quo this all out is, hey guys, we'll provide you a ton of investment if you kind of drop this one issue, because it's making our ally feel really uncomfortable. And I bet you there were lots of negotiations on all sorts of topics, from economic development to social justice to human rights to economic stability. I understand that South Africa is still faced in some areas with a drought, although it seems to be not impacting the wine production of South Africa particularly hard, which has some world-class vintages. So I look at sort of the bigger board here, and I see, listen, like, there are political opportunities. There is, blocks, as you said, trade blocks, but also like blocks of sympathetic / even coerced votes at the UN to try and get policies changed to enable, that country's desires.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what you see in South Africa, the biggest factor to me, because Naledi Pandor was very much part of the ICJ. She was what you would call the foreign minister for South Africa. And she has been dropped. And there has not been so much talk about the ICJ anymore. The other thing, of course, is that given that China was so prominent in Namibia, and I kind of got a map so that we can kind of look up where everything is. I don't know if I can bring it up. Okay, I'm going to try. Just going to see if I can share my screen over here.
That'd be cool.
Okay. We hope this works. Yeah, okay, share screen. Okay, is that working?
Yeah, something's happening. There we go. Yeah, awesome.
Go. Yeah. Okay, so is down here, and Namibia is over here.
Mm-hmm.
This is Namibia, Atlantic Ocean, and this is where the biggest oil find before the find in Guyana, I believe, where we have Venezuela is now redrawing the maps because they want to have some of the oil territory in Guyana. But so Namibia suddenly has the biggest oil find in history, basically.
And which is shared a bit with South Africa, right? When you look at international waters.
It's kind of a common economic zone. So, for instance, Walvis Bay, which is the main shipping port over there, is South African technically. So there is kind of a lot of overlap. And then if you look at the UN votes, they'll vote as a bloc. So we had this situation where this Trans-Sahara pipeline, which was supposed to go through Nigeria, Niger, and up into South Spain and South Italy. And when they had the coup, that whole thing became a no-go. That was the Trans-Sahara pipeline. And ExxonMobil had actually put billions, they had sunk billions into getting that ready. I imagine that was quite a significant disappointment.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to look at. Now the assumption is that Russia has got control, but in fact, who gets control of this massive oil field over here? And it's Gulp, which is a Lisbon Portuguese company, but they have got tenders from ExxonMobil,
yeah,
all of Chevron, all of those big names are now in this story. So this changes the lay of this land. If those are the companies, there's no Gazprom there, and there's no Chinese company that I have seen that is a disclosed bidder. So that would very much indicate that this region is now becoming, less under Russian control. Interesting thing is up here is Angola, and apparently the Lobito corridor, which is completely run by the USA, runs through there. And that means that commodities can be taken from places like Zambia and Zimbabwe and so on, and they can be taken out here, and then very easy to take them from the port and carry on, and then you're not even going into this kind of a territory. So I thought that was very interesting, because it was really looking like the point where we had completely sort of become under a Russian-Chinese influence, and the whole region was going in that direction. And now we're seeing, no, there's definitely a shift. And the oil obviously means a lot of money. Let's hope it comes to the people. But Namibia is a very stable country because it's very deserty. There are two deserts. That's pretty much it, and the skeleton coast. So it's not like easy to penetrate. It's not easy to destabilize. You can't get jihadis in like you can in Mozambique, which is on the other side. You have to, basically it's impenetrable. So once they have set up over there, it's a very, very good sign for African Western relations. Let's put it that way.
I think there's a couple of things there. So the first is, of course, the Western companies and European oil companies have the technology to make the extraction viable, and to also do it in as safe, and I'll put safety first, as safe for the environment, right? So I think that's an important aspect. You're right, it's a hostile place, and like you said, it's pretty isolated. But I think what's more important is if they can get extraction, moving, they now are no longer dependent on Middle Eastern exports, okay? And you don't have to go through the canal to get from the Middle East your oil shipments out and then through the Mediterranean. You've got this nice direction that you can go from Namibia up to North America. So that to me is really strategic in terms of like not only being important from a moving away from the destabilized Middle East, and a stable African country that has this amazing resources that can be developed in a sustainable, or let's just say as sustainable as possible, right? Way seems like a huge win for Africa.
Yes, it is. And in fact, Namibia, I believe they're also looking at boosting their tourism. And it's really a dream destination for tourism, because you have excellent wildlife and really unusual topography and things like that. So if you get the oil going over there and you get tourism up, and you don't really have a problem like we have on our east side, this is a very good and positive sign. And also just looking, if you think about Argentina pulled out of BRICS.
Yeah.
And okay, South Africa is still very much a part of BRICS, and we don't know what's going to happen with BRICS currency, although I believe Janet Yellen did say that it was now her biggest concern is with de-dollarization, the BRICS countries. But just to go back to the lay of the land, with Argentina and South Africa sort of more under Western influence, that means access to the Antarctic. And I
Yes.
know there's a lot of troop movement going to the Antarctic. And we've got two major access zones, which have now seemed to be more under Western control than under Russian control. Do you see that as being important?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Russian ability to project power into Antarctica is going to be limited by a gigantic logistic supply chain. Not so with the Arctic in above Canada,
Yes.
and a piece of and I guess Denmark has a little piece of it because their Greenland is a protectorate of Denmark, and you've got Alaska on the end of Canada there also has a piece of the action, but the rest is pretty much surrounded by Russia with some Norway up there and a few other a couple of the Nordic countries, but it's generally Russia and Canada with some slices that belong to other people, and that's more of, I think, the interest to the Russians. They're, I'm going to be blunt, a cold weather people. Right. Their equipment, such as it is more capable, I think, of operating in that kind of Northern European environment. I think that the Antarctic is an opportunity to be able to move quickly around the globe for the south, for the global south, like everything kind of below the equator and the tropic. I think it's Cancer is the lower one instead of Tropic of Capricorn is the top one. Can't remember that, but the idea being is that you have this transit point. Now, the other tragedy, though, of the Antarctic is the wildlife there is really being impacted by global climate change, and so we need to look and kind of revisit the Arctic and Antarctic treaties in terms of like being very careful about wrecking that environment and being good stewards of that, and doing the joint scientific research that is going on, and somehow keeping the politics off of both places. But that's quite hard. Everyone's out looking for natural resources.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And there is a lot of troop movement up in the Arctic, certainly. And even, I believe, lurking in the Antarctic. And that would be a shame. They're sort of waiting for.
It was so severe that Canada had to replace the Lee Enfields that they had given to the Canadian Rangers, who are largely recruited from the Aboriginal populations to the north. We call them First Nations people. The rather crass was Eskimo, a term that we're not supposed to use anymore. But we have stepped up our surveillance of the Canadian Arctic. Now, keep in mind, though, it's a massive coastline. And I think someone once told me if you took the entire population of Canada and stood it, across that coastline of the Arctic, okay, you wouldn't be able to see the person left or right of you. It would be like over 5-10 miles away or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a nation of 35 million people. So, not a lot. But I think what Canada is quickly realizing is that our extravagant missions overseas, shall we say, even into Africa, for the size of our country and the capability of our country, we need to pay more attention to what's going on at home. And I think we can leave the adventuresome activity from a military perspective to the Americans, but it's Canadian coastal defenses, if you will, to enforce our economic zone. We almost got into a fight with Spain, right? We're both NATO allies, but Spanish trawlers were coming into the 200 kilometer economic zone around Canada, and they were fishing with wild abandon. which was threatening the Canadian fishing industry. And I think we almost sent a submarine out there to let them know we mean boss. But like, it's unlikely that we would have actually done anything.
That's
Show of
very
force.
interesting. I'm wondering if you had problems with Chinese fishing boats, because we do.
Yeah, not so much. The Chinese, I think the journey from China up into the Atlantic, especially the northern part of the Atlantic, that's a big, big journey. I'm not saying they don't have factory ships out there doing it, because they do globally, but I don't see it as being as much an imminent threat to the natural resources, and by natural I mean fish, as it is in places like the South China Sea, off the coast of Africa, and other places.
Regarding the South China Sea, what do you make of the increased tensions between Philippines, Japan, and China?
Yeah, I mean, I think they all got to get into a room and hash it out before they start slugging it out. I mean, already China has been pretty belligerent to the Philippines, and we've seen, kind of the videos of Chinese ships being dumb and nasty and breaking stuff. And yeah, I think it is certainly a global area of tension. This is why I think the Americans have been sailing into the South China Sea, as a sovereignty exercise and a right of what they call the rules of maritime passage, where you're allowed through international treaty to transit these particular areas. And so far, it's all been Chinese rhetoric, claiming that it's provocative, but the Chinese aren't looking for a fight with the United States right now. Too much is at stake, and this is one of the interesting things. Like today is the King's Speech, where the new Labour government in the UK is going to outline its new policy. Folks asked me to comment on it, and basically, is there going to be any sort of abrupt change in the policies against Russia or China? And even though there's been an increase in cyber attacks and espionage attempts and attacks on our national critical infrastructure, I kind of said emphatically no. The Russian policy will stay in place, because essentially, if we don't support Ukraine, we'll be supporting Poland next. So everyone gets that, but when it comes to China, it's hard to be hard on China when you're doing 90 billion in trade and it's like your fourth or fifth largest trading partner. So there's only so much you're going to be able to get away with of being hard on China, because ultimately, if China decides, because of sanctions, to triple the price of like washers and dryers and stoves and things like that, who's going to feel it? The electorate is going to feel it, right? And that would be devastating for the Labour government to get into a trade war with China over durable goods, of which I think more than 70% of durable goods are manufactured or part of the Chinese supply chain in the UK. So it would be absolutely one of the largest foreign policy blunders ever to pick a fight, I think, at this point with China. Now, interestingly enough, in researching it, trade with China has gone down by about 20% over the last few years. So yes, it sounds to me like the previous government and now the current government may continue in that trend, identifying that there need a certain level of economic resilience against sort of like putting all of your eggs in one Chinese basket. And so I think, that diversity question now becomes a really big one. And I've said it before, I think even on your program, is the United Kingdom should join NAFTA as opposed to back to the EU. I think they'd find it a better relationship and a more prosperous one.
Yeah. And just back to Africa quickly, I noticed that Keir Starmer said absolutely no to the Rwanda option.
Yeah, that's not surprising. The economies of Europe right now are basically pouring into the Ukraine to hold off the Russians. No one's up for a Middle East or African adventure, I don't think. This does mean that countries like South Africa, ones with stable democracies, have a bit more flex and power over, I think, the middle part and the southern part of Africa. the north, I think, the north part of Africa is almost a lost cause. I think, but I think there is influence to be gained. There's economic prosperity and development opportunities for South African and other stable democracies in that particular region. The biggest issue I see is the corruption, and hopefully the populace will get to the point where they start to bring in that next generation of leaders that realizes that the corruption is sort of the number one issue that has to be dealt with at some point.
Certainly the new cabinet in South Africa is very indicative of a policy to challenge corruption. That very interesting placements of people for competence rather than for political reasons. There's definitely been an enormous shift in the new unity government. How long it'll last, I don't know. I am worried that we will feel a bit of a jihadi increase because of this, because that's generally we have got Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Sunnah, these types of groups. We have them up in Mozambique. Actually, I'll just bring up that map again. Not this one, that one. Oh, I have to share it from here. There we go. Share screen. Let's see if I can get it.
Did last time.
Yeah. Okay, so that you did. Can you see it?
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Okay, so you see where Mozambique is.
Yeah.
And then this is Somalia. It's not that far away from Somalia, and so you can see how this turns into. It can absolutely dribble down into South Africa. It has. There's South Africa. We have a small group of not yet problematic, but maybe one day. So that is a worry for me, is that destabilization of that kind. I'm hoping we can fend it off. Rwanda was going to be for deporting undesirables, according to Rishi Sunak, and there's going to be no more of that.
Yeah, that program died hard after spending about 100 to 150 million on that. Oops.
Yep. And I don't know if it's just as well, because I don't know if you've been following, but I did not realize that the Hutu Tutsi problem had arisen again. And we have apparently, I haven't fully looked into this, but apparently the Congolese government is targeting Tutsis. And for that reason,
Rwanda, a designated under legislation safe country, was busy dropping mortar shells, I think, on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So it is not safe, demonstrably not safe. But also, you're right. The historic rivalry between the Hutus and the Tutsis, going all the way back to when Canadian peacekeeper troops were on the ground, has been a historic rivalry. They almost need to separate the country and bring in African Union soldiers to partition it and put the Tutsis on one side and the Hutus on the other, and a demarcation border. Because these two powerful groups, inflamed sensitivities, absolutely no regard for any sort of I would say dialogue or civilized behavior. They're willing to chop each other up at a moment's notice, and that problem is not going to go away. The only way to make it go away is sort of to go with the idea that, listen, if we develop an economy and lift all of these people out of poverty, there won't be an issue of, them versus us anymore. It will be economic prosperity and growth for all. That's a difficult sell in a region that historically has been so divided for so long.
I believe the problem is because actually Paul Kagame did pull off an amazing feat in stabilizing Rwanda after 1994, and he really did get it to a point where it's a very safe and prosperous country, weirdly, but apparently the Tutsis in question are living in the DRC Congo. And that is why Uganda and Rwanda are making incursions in with the rebel groups. It's to protect the Tutsis from yet another genocide. Of course, it's incredibly complex, and I wouldn't leave that as the last word. There's a lot more research to do, but it would be a very great pity if this type of ethnic violence starts up again. And then we've got the whole of Niger and all of those countries unstable, and Egypt is sort of a bit of a tinderbox, as I understand it. It's not looking very happy over there. So we have a real problem where all the Islamic countries are. Basically, if you look at Africa, that's where the problem is. Why is this? It's obviously a knock-on effect of the Israeli-Hamas war. This was a concern of mine. I was always concerned that if they started off with sort of jihad over there, sectarian violence would boil over in other parts of the world, because it's such a flammable, combustible thing, this whole jihadi phenomenon. And now they're attacking from the Hezbollah side, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So poor, uneducated folks that are angry is what comes down to the fertile ground for absolutely abhorrent violence against another group who they blame for their lot in life. And this we've seen historically throughout the whole sort of period and rise and fall of various different movements. I don't think I'm actually very optimistic here. Hezbollah has zero chance of winning against Israel, and I don't even know how to define winning, other than to say forcing a peace treaty with Israel because of horrific losses on both sides. I think Israel is smart enough to understand that the one thing Hezbollah does not have is an air force. And the power and capabilities of the Israeli Air Force, absolutely state of the art. It's nothing for them to sortie over the skies of Lebanon and take out specific bad guys and any concentration. Throughout the war, we've seen the ineffectiveness of Hezbollah's mass rocket attacks with David Sling and some of the other technologies that Israelis have. I don't think that Hezbollah is on the road to self-destruction. I think they're quite comfortable with their lot in life. In Lebanon. So I can't see a scenario where it breaks out into an actual shooting war, rather than a collection of skirmishes back and forth with the Israelis occasionally taking out targets of opportunity.
I sincerely hope you're right. I have to tell you that news from Israel is that they are preparing for a northern war.
Well, you would be stupid not to prepare, but Israel has always been prepared. They were caught by surprise. I think they will never get caught by surprise again. I think if there's any question about how important intelligence is, they have their own satellites. They're able to monitor things. They need to correct what appears to be a communications channel problem, and getting that intelligence to the military operations and to the leadership to approve plans. I think they're fixing that. And I honestly think, Israel, there's no that I can see existential threat to Israel. I feel like the Americans, parking themselves off the shore is about as much as they needed to do. I'm sure they're providing some special forces and aircraft capability. We saw that. But in general, Israel can stand on its own. I think it's prepared to do that, and it has said so publicly. Like, we appreciate the support, but we're good guys. So I think Israel is one of these countries that isn't going to flex its muscles and say, I mean, they're going to take every threat seriously, but I don't think they're
Mhm.
going to like sensationalize it. I think they've been prepared since 1967.
I sincerely hope so. I think the big problem has been with the wildfires. There are 60,000 Israelis displaced from the border area since October 7, and now we've had all the wildfires caused by Hezbollah, and that has, I think, taken a bit of a toll. And there have just been one too many rockets, so I think it might heat up a little bit, but I hope, generally speaking, it stays muted.
Yeah.
To swing back to China again, you sent me something very interesting suggesting that Russia and China had gone from what is it, a no limits partnership
Mhm.
to a slightly frostier frenemy status.
Yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me about
Yeah.
that.
So I think China realizes that it's part of the North American and European economies, and enjoys its manufacturing. Russia has no money. China needs money and investment. They have a big real estate kind of bubble in China as a result of some massive investments and growth. And there's those commercial buildings and some even residential buildings that they've built are not being utilized. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of like dead construction in China. And although they want to sort of like be, I would say, aligned on some areas of Russia, they're absolutely diametrically opposed to some of the Russians' policies. Um, they do need oil, so that's one thing that they enjoy by having that relationship with Russia. But they can get oil from Iran and as well, right? Um,
Mhm.
they basically are commercial opportunists and don't want to fall under heavy sanction by Europe or the United States because of their support for Russia, so that they had to dial it back. Because otherwise, they were looking at and this is sort of like you know gouging out your eye despite your face. They realize that
Mhm.
their economy is dependent on the West. Um, as we realize that China is an integrated part of our manufacturing capability here in the West. So this is why I think they had to dial back their no limits partnership with Russia, because we were about to put limits on China as a result. So I think that was
Yeah.
a flex and a good one. And to kind of say, now whether or not the trade-off will be we look the other way when China decides to take Taiwan down, we'll see, right? Like there's always quid pro quo.
Yeah, there does seem to be. I was astonished when they went into Hong Kong before the treaty was up that nobody said anything. I was just
No.
absolutely deathly silent. Nobody seemed to say anything, and it was just accepted. Looking over here, and I'm seeing that China has sort of been circumventing Russia by going to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and kind of doing deals directly, a little bit like Macron did,
Yeah,
which
so that
again,
was that's a great way of laundering direct investment from other nations into Russia. But if you
mhm,
used shell corporations and shipped things right via that circuitous route, then you weren't technically in violation of the sanctions. So the stands, if you will, have benefited tremendously at now becoming like import export, you know, and then again, oil can come out of Russia, be moved across, one or two stands, and then all of a sudden it's been locally produced from, I think it's Uzbekistan that has oil wells. One of them does, I think, a fair amount, but not maybe as much as nearly as much as Russia. But you can blend it, right? Like, is it subject to sanctions if it's 50% Russian oil or 49% Russian oil, right? So these shell games, the movement of money through the stands, are always going to be part. And this is in the fine tradition of the Americans in World War II. who, through the Total Oil Company and through Argentina, were sending oil over to the Nazis. So, and the book Trading with the Enemy kind of outlines how all of that worked. And, it's a fascinating look at sanctions avoidance and trade embargo avoidance as well. And so it's nothing new. And you kind of expect it, that the longer sanctions are in place, the more workarounds will be found. Great example, North Korea obviously has been sanctioned almost since, the end of that particular North Korea-South Korea war, or the Korean War. It's been under sanctions ever since. And so they've found very creative ways of moving money around the globe and about at the same time claiming absolute poverty and starvation, except of course for the ruling class. And we've been sending them aid as well. So.
And tell me, when it comes to what Janet Yellen said about, she's saying no, BRICS isn't a factor. Now she said BRICS is basically her worst nightmare. Not so much because of, I think, a currency, but because so many countries have stopped trading in the US dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a huge issue for the United States.
And you've got this national debt going for 34 trillion. Is it going to be repayable? Is this going to be a problem?
No, it's absolutely not going to be a problem. They can devalue the currency at any time, but contrasting this is the stock market in the United States is outperforming any other index in any other country. The economic growth in the United States is the best in the world right now. They have their own oil supply to the point where they're becoming a net exporter of oil. So they're in a driving seat for the world economies. I think these countries that choose to use alternative financial systems just don't want to follow the American rules. And so this is why they don't want to do American currency exchange. They want to do fiat to fiat, national fiat to national fiat, get a better rate than going through the American banking system. What they do won't be scrutinized or sanctioned by the American financial system. So now that you run the risk, though, of if you put something that is not acceptable because of international sanctions, the Americans are all too happy to sail out there and grab it, and then in one recent case, give it to the Ukrainians to fight the war because it was an arms shipment. There was a recent interdiction of drones that were bound for Russia, I believe, and some Iranian drones that were interdicted in Italy. So the American intelligence services are, looking at global shipping, looking at what's being moved around the world, right? Trying to counter the Black Fleet that we talked about. Russian.
I'd actually like you just to refresh everyone's memory on this Black Fleet or Dark Fleet. Yeah.
The Dark Fleet, Black Fleet, whatever you want to call it, sounds pretty cool, like a Disney movie. But what it is a lot of logistic capacity that Russia has essentially grabbed that doesn't insure under the Lloyd's, who traditionally handled 80 to 90% of maritime shipping insurance. They're not insured. They frequently travel with transponders off, so you don't know where they are, what they have, and where they're going. And they're also usually quite a bit older ships, right? So you can imagine the safety and the concerns with that. So this is all part of the sanction avoidance capability that Putin, and I think Putin was really instructed by North Korea and Iran on, hey, we've been living with sanctions for a really long time. Here's how you go, bro. Here's how we do it, right? And so I think, that was part and parcel of part of the relationships that Russia has forged with North Korea and with Iran, was not necessarily, all the arms. That's part of it, and the UN support, which is part of it too, but also like, hey, we need help avoiding sanctions. Tell us, your magic potions, how you work that. And so I think, this idea is, I think everyone at the table of, nations was like, yeah, don't use the American financial system, bro. Like, or the European financial system, which is, somewhat beholden to the American financial system. So, we just got to go fiat currency to fiat currency, Iranian, what is it, the real, Iranian real to the Russian ruble, a direct exchange negotiated, at a rate that you wouldn't find, anywhere else. So, yeah, I think these alternative financial systems, including, of course, cryptocurrencies, are a big threat. And I agree 100% with Janet Yellen when she basically said, yeah, this is a big problem. It's a problem that's going to get worse.
Right. And then your specialty, cybersecurity. Tell me about cybersecurity and war. What is the capacity? How much influence can it have? What is it doing? What's happening there?
Yeah, it has I'm going to say a knock-on effect. And when you look at what a nation state can do in terms of disinformation, misinformation, and suppression of voters and the exercise of democracy, it's pretty impressive. We haven't had a good track record in beating the disinformation capabilities of Russia, especially in the American elections, but also here too for the Brexit campaign and the Russian influence in the last election previous to the election that we just had. Of course, we don't find out how much the Russians may have influenced it until the investigations occur, and it could be years from now. But what we do know is it's part of, Clausewitz said that war is politics by different means. We can add cyber war is politics by different means. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is demoralize the populace, make them feel futile, that no matter what they do, the relentless Russian cyber attacks or nation state espionage will continue. And respond all you want. But we know that we have far more to lose the more connected we are, the more dependent on information technology we become in the West versus countries that can go a few hours without having to update Instagram. So we have built a commercial society based on probably one of the most vulnerable commodities that we have, which is the internet and our massive GDP growth that is driven by technological innovation. And so nation states will come at it from two directions. They'll say, we're going to take your intellectual property, we're going to build our knockoffs. Sometimes the knockoffs are substantially improved, and we're going to go into markets to push you guys out of it by offering them essentially the same Huawei phone that you can get as an Apple at 1/10 the price, right? And EV vehicles being the next big threat that China can unleash on everywhere except Europe and the United States, that said, hold on there. No one deserves a 10,000 euro car that runs 300 kilometers on a battery pack and is, nice. We don't want that, because it's hard for BMW to even compete at triple the price, at 30,000 euro, right? So I feel like this is all tied up in that cyber relationship of demoralizing the populace, of making them feel futile, that we can't even keep the trains on time here in our country, and the specter and the fear of like outages is more potent, I think, than the actual outages. Because here's a great example. If we have a protected species in the UK called swans, the white, beautiful bird things, if they get on the track, we shut down the rail line until obviously a specialized team goes out and swooshes the swans off the track. Okay. And that makes the news in a cutesy segment, towards the end. Oh, look at this specialized team moving the swans off the track. And it's, good. And it makes you feel good because we're not, running over swans. Facts being what they are, I don't think the Russians and the Chinese would give two shits about the swans and just throw the train down the track. Not us. Want to do good. if it was a cyber attack, it would be on all the pages. It would be on constant. It would be on the scroll line of every news thing that the Russian or Chinese or insert threat actor or ransomware gang has created this outage as a result of a cyber attack. My God, right? Everybody would be losing their mind. But the thing is that the aggressive nations like Russia and China know that's exactly what we do, right? So, a ransomware gang attacks a laboratory that is servicing the healthcare system, and the headlines read, cyber attack prevents 3,000 cancer patients from getting their treatments, right? It's a massive kind of like impact when you think about it, like in terms of headlines, but it's literally, and I'm not trivializing it at that, but if it was 300,000, we'd be going to war, right?
Yeah.
So this is this, I call it sort of like the irritation factor that that cyber equipped nations are using on us is part of their overall strategy to undermine the confidence that we have in our democracy, in our national critical infrastructure, etc. So it's part mind game, part espionage, and part pure disruption and economic opportunity, right?
And just on the cyber front, ransomware, you sent me something very interesting about ransomware, and I'm not sure what the name of it was. Iranian, possibly.
Yeah. So Iran has been an interesting development, if you will, because if you think about this, back in around the 2008 time period, they developed denial of service attacks on American banks. And so, that's the equivalent of sort of just keep knocking on your door until you get sick of answering it to find no one is there. Since then, they've now, probably with Russian and Chinese support, we have some evidence to suggest they're building out quite a significant cyber capability. And this has been an evolutionary development. They've set up shell corporations so that it's under contractors, so the attribution directly to the Iranian government is somewhat obscured. Right? They can say, oh, these are contractors that we hired to do cyber stuff, and they obviously are patriotic and got a little bit out of control. But there's big money in ransomware. And it's big money because when you get paid in Bitcoin, it automatically exchanges at that US dollar rate. Okay. And so this is what you want if you're in a depressed economy, because I think it's like 7 rubles to 1 US dollar right now. So you have 7 times the buying power in Russia for every US dollars. And the Iranians probably looked at that and went, we want a piece of that action. So they've been doing ransomware for a while now as well, and gaining in capability and sophistication. And with ransomware as a service, so groups, largely Russian groups, Russian-speaking groups, have set up the ability for you to just sign up and become an affiliate of a ransomware crew and spray this stuff out there, and then you get paid, right? And then they get a cut of the action. So, yeah, so it's just like, going to your broker and saying, I want, 3,000 shares. And it's like, yeah, it's going to cost X number of dollars, but now for the privilege of brokering that to you, I'm going to take 2%. Same idea.
And what can people do to fight against ransomware? I'm like outraged. This is happening.
So I used to say, just cybersecurity stuff and, like multi-factor authentication and patching and updating. That's the standard line that you get from every security wanker that's out there. What I'm going to tell you now is a lot simpler. Do all that. Okay. Don't neglect it. But when you get hit, be open, be transparent, and make a report and give as much evidence you can to local law enforcement. And here's why. Eventually, your report might be the one that breaks the camel's back, might lead to, in the case of Canadian investigations into the NetWalker ransomware, finding that guy in his basement in a suburb of, I believe it was Montreal or Toronto, and bringing him to justice. And in Canadian terms, bringing him to justice means sending him over to the United States. that's how we do business, right? Because once you've unveiled and took off the level of sort of transparency, and revealed who these actors are and collecting some evidence, they're going to make a mistake. And when they make a mistake, if they're being watched by intelligence services and police forces, that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so I think it's incredibly important to report crime. It really is. And that can make the difference.
Yeah, because I would imagine people have the urge to keep this on the down low. It looks bad for your business. It's bad image-wise to know that you have been all your clients, all your information has been leaked. There must be a considerable embarrassment factor, and so you try to hush it up.
Yeah, that's the wrong thing. You
wrong thing to do.
In our world of social media and Twitter and Reddit and social media in general, there's no such thing as holding this secret. People know. People will know. Leaks will happen, and then it'll be twice as embarrassing, because not only do you have to explain what happened, you have to explain to regulators and to your customers why you didn't tell them about it. So I think, if you want twice the pain, by all means, be untransparent and unrepentant.
Absolutely. And then finally, I want to ask you about AI. AI and its impact on everything.
Yeah. So looking at what PwC and Deloitte said in 2017, was the time to start working on AI. Now, a lot of firms, and I kind of blame the venture capital and the private equity world for this. A lot of firms look at these as funding opportunities to make breakthroughs, and then, of course, sometimes 5x or 10x their money that they put into a company. So AI is a lot of hype right now. Everybody's kind of incorporating some sort of AI element to be with the times, as it were, and show that your technology is advancing. I have two thoughts about that. One, it might actually be a bit of a panacea in that you make an investment in AI and then you suddenly discover things that you didn't anticipate, and it leads to a breakthrough. And medical science is a great example of how AI, I think, can diagnose diseases faster. It can be more, it can be used to train various different diagnostic models to understand what's going on with your blood or other samples and things like that. So I think there's some great areas where it is going to be world shaking. In cybersecurity, not so much. It's still phishing emails. It's still 72%, according to Verizon Data Breach 2023, human mistakes at some point. So to me, it's like AI will increase its value in some market verticals and some areas like healthcare, but it will be just another kind of add-on feature and not tremendously impactful in other areas. So again, it's sort of like we're spraying and praying right now with dollars to get those breakthroughs in particular areas. And as that turns out, we'll see AI advance maybe a lot faster in healthcare, for instance, right, than in other industry verticals. It's hard to use AI in extractive resources like mining. Okay. It could be really interesting as AI is used a little bit more in the stock market, for instance, where it's been trading algorithms and learning trading algorithms have been with us for years and years and years. So, it's a mixed bag. I don't think we have anything to fear from it. I do feel that on the scale of ethical behavior, using AI to create a fake girlfriend, is, or deep fakes is like an evil use of AI. But I think the vast majority of investment that's being made today is into beneficial AI. And I think when you are looking at private equity and you are looking at VC investment, I think most firms, right, don't want to be hauled in front of the SEC, right, or sanctioned. So they're going to want to see how are you managing your risks with this implementation of AI? How are you putting ethics at the center of your decision making when it comes to AI? And then I think the most important thing is, how are you going to detect when your AI goes crazy and starts making wrong decisions? Because wrong decisions aren't just wrong decisions. If they're in healthcare, they can mean life or death. And if it comes back to a diagnostic program that just invented a result because it got confused, right, had competing priorities or misunderstood something, then you run a real risk. And in healthcare, that risk can have completely dire consequences or completely beneficial consequences. It's a 50-50 dice roll. But to be fair, I don't want to go in, and this is where I think the big adoption question comes from, is I don't want to go into a healthcare situation and be told, well, it's 50-50 what the computer may decide. I want better odds. And so I think everybody right now is thinking about it from that perspective of beneficial AI, but how beneficial is it going to be? Am I prepared to get into an airplane without a pilot? Am I prepared to get into an airplane that's driven by AI? Those are questions. Some people, hey, if it halves the cost of my flight, I might take the AI flight. What could go wrong, right? So I think we'll see a lot of those fundamental human questions having to confront that AI, which to be most effective of AI has to make decisions that impact our physical world, right? And so I think we're going to get there. And I really hope we haven't figured it out first, and that people aren't suddenly jumping into AI Uber taxis and crashing to death off of bridges, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget. I'm just looking it up now to double check, but it was the Boeing Max 7, the Ethiopian, that got hijacked by the computer program and crashed, and it was just an absolutely hideous, and it was probably I think they had another plane that did that as well in the Max 7. Well, Boeing has been very problematic lately altogether, pieces falling off and so on. But the idea of AI being able to sort of hijack the pilot's control of the plane was absolutely terrifying to me. I'll tell you where I found AI to be very helpful. I asked a client of mine needed an update on the whole situation with the break in ECOWAS. And I'm a control freak, so I don't like to leave anything to anything else. So I wrote a paper, but what I did was I found a vast swath of articles that I could never have gotten through entirely myself, and I set some parameters and I put it through ChatGPT basically, and just it takes the donkey work off. If I had 5 research students, that is the effect that it has. And so it makes so much faster when you see a region where there's something has been stabilized. You can go in very quickly and you can check what trade agreements, what supply chain routes, what commodities might be a problem. And it's quite incredible how much information and data it can go through over there. So I see a very great use for it. But of course, it's the garbage in, garbage out, right? So I'm not putting an instruction into AI and saying, tell me what this is. I'm giving it stuff and I'm going, okay, I need you to summarize. I'm going through everything. And I think certainly in newsroom situations that you can actually crunch a lot of information very quickly. And I see use for that. It's friction and time that sort of get taken out of the equation and getting together information very quickly geopolitically. And I found it very useful. I don't know if you have any caveats to add over there, but it certainly does speed up your ability to.
Yeah, I completely agree with that application of it, because at the end of the day, it's not really life and death. It's more like a little bit of embarrassment if you just copy and paste an AI response. It's a they always say in
Yeah, you can't do
writing
that. You
anything,
can't do
in writing anything, you need to absolutely starting with the blank page is the hardest thing, but getting a skeleton, an outline or something like that, and then working within that, it goes twice as fast, right? So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And over here, what you're doing is you specifically you're saying, okay, check the you feeding it in the relative links because it doesn't know everything, and you're going through like which treaties are going to be affected, with the schism with ECOWAS, which treaties, what
Yeah,
border, what trains are there, and you put it all together like that. It's something that would take you a month to do, that
yeah,
you can do in 2 days maybe, and
yeah.
from that point of view,
Correlating data
yes,
is one of the things that works very well with. But you're absolutely right. The quality of that data, the problematic garbage in, garbage out thing that you just identified,
yeah.
that is the crux of it. That is absolutely the most difficult thing, is again to swallow the vast amounts of data that we have and make sure that it's of such quality and weight that it becomes uh, a, a, a learning mode and training mode that makes effective decisions when asked for output. Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. I actually ran a little test that I gave it the question, and it came up with this little prompt response. And then I gave it a whole lot of articles to summarize, and a whole lot of treaties, and a whole lot of laws, and a lot about supply chain and so on. And I then said, okay, I need you to pull up this, this, and this for me. And it was very good at doing that. I was very comfortable doing it because I had provided the information and I was double checking it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you can't just go and ask AI to give you a report. It doesn't. I've tested it. It doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know what to look for. I use my parameters, which are always very much based on supply chain. Where's the oil? Where's the supply chain? What are the trade treaties? What commodities are going through here? And where are we going to see sticking points? And it actually brought up some very interesting, a lot of problems for the ECOWAS countries that are left over because of this the francophone junta schism.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add, or are we about done?
I think we're about done. I will say that I hope that this one gets out there, and
Oh yeah, no, this one will definitely get out there. Very quickly, Kenya is in Haiti now,
yes, that's
and
right.
yeah, and they are apparently, well, there hasn't been much word, but I gather they are doing okay. There's certainly been no disaster, and this will be
I
very interesting to see whether it
It
works.
will. It absolutely will. We'll see how things go. The problem always being is once folks have been given a taste of power, they're sometimes pretty loath to give it up. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
I hope.
barbecue, scary name.
I,
I think he'll be giving it up easily, but hopefully with trained and troops, because obviously Haiti's not really trained troops. It's just gangs gone wild. So people who are trained, and Kenyans are trained because they deal with poachers and things like that. They're quite tough and they know how to work together. So
yeah,
I'm
for
hoping
sure.
that will improve the situation over there.
Yeah, I
Yeah, so
completely
that's
wish
great.
them
We have
luck and safety. If they can stabilize Haiti,
absolutely.
that would be great for the Caribbean.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a human tragedy that's going on over there. Well, I think we've caught up on everything. As you say, we got hit by all the information just came out right afterwards, and we were outdated in a
Exactly.
couple of
We
hours.
were outdated by a couple of weeks. So this one I hope will last a bit longer.
I
This has
think
been
this
my
will be
pleasure.
fun.
You take care.
It's been my pleasure too. Thank you so much, Ian Thornton-Trump. A pleasure as always.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye. Speak soon.